Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of High Energy Girl. And today's awesome guest is Ari Whitten, who's a functional medical expert on conquering fatigue and supercharging energy. So, this interview, Ari totally nerded out on energy, mitochondria, and how to feel your best. And it was just awesome. A lot of his stuff was new to me and I didn't understand until he explained it, which he did a great job. And there is hope. That is the best news I got, that if you're feeling sluggish, you don't always have to feel that way. And you want to check out his book, Eat for Energy. But let's go and listen to the juicy details from Ari. Hey everyone, welcome to High Energy Girl, a podcast helping women to age stronger because it is never too late to get fit, be strong, and feel sexy. I'm your host, Tracy Gluhige, health coach and personal trainer and founder of highenergygirl.com. Each week, we will either have a guest interview, which will provide you encouragement or an actionable tip to help you age stronger, or I will do a solo episode. Please also join our awesome Facebook group called High Energy Girls, and I'm looking forward to see you on the inside of that group and hope you enjoy today's show. Hey everyone, this is Tracy, and I have a special announcement. In order for me to help more women age stronger, I have created a 90-day one-on-one coaching program. And the goal here is to teach women over 50 how to age stronger while burning fat and boosting energy without going hungry or living in the gym. If you'd like more information, please hit me up at tracy@highenergygirl.com or friend me on Facebook and send me a message. I have a goal of transforming 1,000 women in the next year, and I hope you are one of them. Hey, Ari, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. And you are nice and tan. Where are you from?
Well, I'm from San Diego, California originally, but I'm living in Costa Rica right now, and I surf a lot, so I get a nice tan.
Incredible. That's so cool. Super cool. So for the listeners that don't know you yet, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I have been studying health science as my sort of lifelong passion and obsession since I was about 12 or 13 years old. And I'm 38 now, so over 25 years, I've been doing health science. I've been geeking out on health science and biohacking before biohacking was a term. For the first decade or so of that, my focus was very much the world of fitness, performance enhancement, body composition, fat loss, muscle gain. And then in my mid-20s, a pretty bad case of mononucleosis that not only made me very sick for a couple months, but left me with severe chronic fatigue for close to a year. And in that process, I mean, we could talk about all the details of what happened if you're interested, but basically that was the big catalyst for me to shift my attention towards energy and the science of what regulates human energy levels, and kind of move away from all the fitness and fat loss and muscle gain focused stuff.
Okay, that's cool. So when you're speaking of energy, I notice there's two different kinds. There's the kind of energy that I started this brand with, which was I'm really got lots of energy, I'm hyper and all that. And then there's like foundational energy, like quantum physics type energy, like, I do reiki and all that. So when you say energy, which one of these are you mostly referring to?
I'm talking about a person's subjective sense of vitality and physical energy. So nothing woo-woo or spiritual or esoteric infused into this, though arguably we could start to make some of those connections. There's research on, for example, Qigong, which is an internal energy enhancement method, and there's research on that in relationship to the subjective sense of physical energy and vitality that a person has, and other health benefits of it, and relaxing the nervous system and lowering stress levels and things of that nature. But yeah, in general, the work that I do is about physical energy production, cellular energy production,
Mitochondria.
mitochondrial energy production.
Okay, got it. And I will say that Qigong, Reiki, all of that is just another word for the same thing, but it's based on like the atoms and the energy space in the field right there that, it's, so I don't think it's woo woo because it's physics, right? So but a lot of people might say that. And it's also based on the same principles as like acupuncture working the meridians.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I
so
just don't.
just to be clear, I'm not calling it woo woo in any sort of derogatory sense. I'm a qigong practitioner myself. I do yoga. I'm into a lot of these esoteric things. But from the perspective of conventional medicine, such practices would be considered in the realm of sort of woo woo. Anyway, we could do a whole digression on that if you're interested in that.
No.
But okay.
Not at all. Because I think most people are more aware of the energy that they feel inside their body that gives them the ability to go run, jump, play, be happy. So let's start with that. So you switched gears and it was based on you being sick with mono. And how come? What's the correlation there?
What's the correlation with what?
Mono and energy. Like how did
Okay.
that shift happen?
Okay, so let me maybe explain a bit more about the story of what happened, and then we'll sort of get to that answer. So I initially saw a whole bunch of conventional doctors. Nobody could really figure out what was going on with me. They diagnosed me with strep throat. They put me on penicillin. That obviously didn't help me. It just made me worse. And then, many weeks into it, I finally saw somebody who thought to test for Epstein-Barr virus. They did that test. 2 weeks later, probably 6 or 8 weeks into my illness at this point, I finally got the results back saying my Epstein-Barr virus titers were off the charts. And so then it was mononucleosis from Epstein-Barr virus. At which point, once I got that diagnosis, I'm like, okay, well, what can you do for me to help me get better? Nothing really. We don't really have anything to offer. I ended up seeing a whole bunch of alternative practitioners, natural health, functional medicine practitioners, pretty much all of whom diagnosed me with adrenal fatigue. But the tests that they ran for cortisol didn't show that I had any cortisol abnormality. So that kind of made me suspicious. This ended up making me go on I ended up spending a whole year of my life looking into the research on the relationship of adrenal function and cortisol levels to fatigue. And that's a whole thing we could talk about as well. In general, the bottom line of the quick summary of a year of my life is that the research doesn't really support the notion that adrenal fatigue and cortisol abnormalities underlie or are the cause of chronic fatigue. So basically, the question was, as I started to explore this more and more and see all these practitioners, I realized nobody really has a very good understanding of what is really regulating human energy levels. So at that point, this was kind of the catalyst for me to become obsessed with that topic. And that's when I really discovered that mitochondria were at the core of regulating human energy levels. So mitochondria control human energy levels. They are the most upstream thing in our body. Now, we're taught in high school and college biology courses to think of them as, the powerhouse of the cell, quote unquote, these sort of mindless energy generators that just take in carbs and fats and pump out cellular energy in the form of something called ATP. But it turns out they're actually much more than just mindless energy generators. They're not mindless at all. They actually are like the canaries in the coal mine of our body. So they have this whole second role in addition to their role as energy generators, and it is as these canaries of the coal mine They are environmental sensors, exquisitely sensitive environmental sensors in our body that are constantly taking samples of what's going on in the body. Are we under attack? That's the central question that they're asking constantly. Are we under attack? Is there a stress or a threat present? And in response to the detection of any threats that are present, they turn down the dial on energy production and shift resources towards cellular defense. So fundamentally, and this is really the central aspect of the work that I do, and what I would argue is a proper scientific framework for understanding what regulates human energy levels. It is the most upstream thing is our mitochondria responding to what kind of environment they're in. Are they in a safe environment, in which case they'll operate in energy mode, or to the extent that they're picking up on dangers or threats that are present, they will turn down the dial on energy production and shift resources towards cellular defense. So fundamentally, our energy levels are a reflection of the degree to which our mitochondria are either operating in energy mode or defense mode.
Interesting. So they're part of the immune system. Is that what they would be doing when they're not producing energy?
Mitochondria are considered part of the innate immune system, and they're not like a white blood cell where they're actively, let's say, chomping up a virus, but they are orchestrating an immune response, and they are actually involved in directly fending off a threat, for example, like a pathogen, like a virus, in the sense that they when they shift out of energy mode into defense mode, part of that reaction, part of sensing, let's say, a pathogen present in the cell, like a virus, is they will actually start producing less energy and start producing way more free radicals, oxidants. And that is designed to create damage. And to a large extent, they will sacrifice themselves, and they'll sacrifice the cell in order to create enough damage that it destroys that virus. So they are absolutely part of the innate immune system in that way. So looping things, a couple things I'll mention. So if everything I explained about this dual role of mitochondria sounds abstract or strange, just think of the last time you got a cold or a flu or COVID. What was one of the key symptoms of that? Fatigue. You were low energy, right? And that is literally your mitochondria shifting out of energy mode towards defense mode. So what I was experiencing was basically my mitochondria doing that, and for a prolonged period of time, losing a lot of mitochondria from a severe infection and having this sort of chronic damage occurring, and then my body kind of getting locked into this defense mode state where the mitochondria are turning down energy production, shifting resources towards cellular defense.
That was great. Good work, especially if all of the naturopaths and everything pointed to adrenal fatigue, which I heard really isn't a thing per se. Even though your cortisol levels were normal, why do you think that was so? Why do you think that's what they pointed to?
Why do I think that they had still insisted on adrenal fatigue?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is sort of it's a really good question that you're asking. There are actually numerous examples of this kind of phenomenon in many different realms of medicine, but the gist of the answer is actually just ideas go viral, so to speak. So a certain idea becomes very prevalent and very popular at a certain time in a certain group of people. And most people are not actively digging into the primary scientific literature and analyzing it and sorting things out for themselves and coming to their own original conclusions. Most people just hear the ideas of other people that they respect. They assume the truth of that, and they repeat the same ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Absolutely.
that keeps going and going and going. And all of a sudden now you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who believe in a certain thing that if you actually went and looked at the primary literature, it doesn't support that thing at all. Yet everybody will swear that thing exists. So as an interesting example of this, just consider this fact. Consider that there are tens of thousands of practitioners, doctors, naturopaths, chiropractors, functional medicine doctors who will absolutely swear up and down adrenal fatigue is a real thing. And yet, if you go ask conventional MDs, endocrinologists, hormone specialists, cortisol is a hormone, if you ask them, what do you think of adrenal fatigue? They will say adrenal fatigue is not a thing at all. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing as adrenal fatigue. And so one of these people has to be wrong. One of these groups of people has to be wrong, because one of them saying, yes, I see people with adrenal fatigue all the time. I diagnose people with adrenal fatigue. Adrenal fatigue is, of course, a real thing. And yet the institute, I forget the exact name of it, something Institute for Endocrinology, represents over 14,000 endocrinologist MDs. They've come out with a public statement saying adrenal fatigue is not a medical phenomenon. There is no evidence to support the idea that chronic stress, mental, physical, emotional stress wears out the adrenal glands, resulting in low cortisol. There is no evidence to support it. So again, one of those groups of people has to be wrong. Now, I'm coming from the natural health background, where I'm very much aligned, generally speaking, with the people in the natural health, functional medicine, wellness space. But in this particular case, those people are wrong about adrenal fatigue, and the conventional medical doctors are right, that the evidence does not support the existence of adrenal fatigue. Now, I've spent literally a year of my life dedicated to this one topic of the literature on basically adrenal function, HPA axis function, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis function at cortisol levels, and fatigue. And I've dug into this scientific literature deeper than maybe there's a handful of people in the world that have spent more time on this literature than I have, but I've got to be in the top 10 or top 5 of as far as people who know that literature. So what I found at the end of digging into all of these studies over 25 years of research from all around the world, most of this research looks like this. Let's take a group of people with chronic fatigue of some kind, and it could be chronic fatigue syndrome. It could be, it goes by different names in the literature. It could be stress-related exhaustion disorder, or it could be vital exhaustion, or it could be burnout syndrome or clinical burnout. These are the different names of fatigue syndromes. And there are studies. There are close to 70 studies that have examined this. Actually, 59 studies, individual studies, and about 20 systematic reviews and meta-analyses. These are where researchers analyze the existing body of evidence on that topic. So let's say they look at the 10 or 12 studies on clinical burnout and cortisol levels, and they do a systematic review of those 10 studies to form a conclusion of what does the overall body of evidence say on that topic. So basically 59 individual studies. The study design looks like this, generally speaking. Take a group of people with chronic fatigue syndrome or clinical burnout or stress-related exhaustion disorder, et cetera, one of those fatigue syndromes. Compare it to a group of healthy people of the same demographic, similar age, sexes, controlling for confounding variables like smoking and exercise and things like that, and measure their cortisol levels. And this is very, very simple. This is Science 101. If the adrenal fatigue theory hypothesis is true, and it is the case that chronic stress is wearing out the adrenals in a way that is leading to abnormal cortisol levels. That is very easily detectable in this kind of study. And there have been dozens of these kinds of studies from all over the world for over 25 years. And it's very easy to see the group with the chronic fatigue syndrome or the burnout syndrome should have abnormal cortisol levels compared to the group that's healthy without fatigue.
You would think.
Very simple, very easy to prove. And what those studies show, those 59 studies, is the vast majority, well, I'll give you the actual numbers. 15 of the 59 studies showed slightly lower cortisol levels in the group with fatigue. 11, and not even abnormal, just still within the normal range, but slightly lower. You could say it's significantly lower. 11 of the 59 showed the opposite finding, slightly higher cortisol levels associated with the group with fatigue. And 33 of the 59 studies, the vast majority of them, showed no discernible difference whatsoever. 33 studies found no difference in cortisol levels between people with full-blown severe chronic fatigue syndrome or full-blown stress-related exhaustion or burnout syndrome and normal healthy people without fatigue. So when you have a body of evidence like that, it's the conclusion is very clear that there is no compelling scientific case to be made that adrenal function and cortisol levels are sort of the primary factor, the primary cause explaining these symptoms. It's very clear that is debunked.
Okay. So going back to what you said originally, that the mitochondria is focusing on energy production unless it is busy dealing with something else. And you use the example of virus based on your mono. Are there other things besides viruses that would take the mitochondria out of its primary role here?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So basically everything that you can imagine, every type of stressor imaginable. Now that sounds like, how could that be true? Do the mitochondria have receptors for every type of stressor? Do they have a receptor for mercury and one for arsenic? And do they have one for alcohol and one for cigarette smoke and one for psychological stress and one for sleep deprivation? No, it doesn't work like that. So, but they can sense all of those stressors and more. They can sense basically every type of stressor. And here's why. The mitochondria have the ability to sense inflammatory cytokines, inflammation in the body. They have the ability to sense reactive oxygen species, which are free radicals, and oxidative damage, oxidative stress. And they have the ability to sense cellular damage. They actually do have receptors on them for what are called purines, which are actually energy molecules, ATP and ADP, which are the molecules of sort of energy. Mitochondria produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, from ADP. And that is cellular energy. That's what's powering our cells. But that energy, those energy molecules, are supposed to be inside of our cells, not floating around freely outside of the cells and in the bloodstream. And when they are floating around freely in the bloodstream, there are actually receptors for those molecules, and that is a signal for cellular damage. So any type of stressor that causes cellular damage, any type of stressor, whether it's sleep deprivation or cigarette smoking or alcohol or heavy metal consumption or psychological stress or any number of other stressors, a pathogen like a virus, any number of other stressors that you can think of that are causing increased inflammation, which they all pretty much do, causing increased reactive oxygen species, which they all pretty much do, or causing cellular damage, which most of them do. The mitochondria can sense those things, and in response to any source of cellular damage or inflammation or oxidative stress, they will turn down the dial on energy production.
So It's almost sounds from what you're explaining is that it's more common to have low energy than it is to have high energy. Like it feels like we're exposed to a lot of that stuff just from living and breathing and chemicals. And, I mean, our environment is not as great as it could be. I mean, I'm lucky. I live on a farm, I live in a good place, but I think a lot of people are exposed to a lot of threats.
100%. Stressors are ubiquitous in the modern world. We have over 70,000 man-made environmental toxicants in the environment. Just to give you a sense of that, there's research where they look at umbilical cord blood of newborn, the blood that's going into a newborn or an unborn baby, and they've shown over 400 detectable levels of over 400 man-made chemicals that are mitochondrial poisons, that are endocrine hormonal disruptors, that are neurotoxins, etc. We are being exposed to hundreds of these compounds from before even we're born, let alone decades of life and consuming maybe not so good food and breathing in, off-gassing from furniture and carpets in your home and inhaling exhaust fumes and air pollution and lots of other sources. And that's just to talk about environmental toxicants, not even to touch on so many of the other aspects of what's poisoning our mitochondria, from the modern lifestyle of psychological stress to light deficiencies and toxicities disrupting our circadian rhythm and our ability to sleep well, to there's many other ones that we could talk about, but so the stressors are ubiquitous. Now, you said something also about it's more common to have low energy than high energy. Kids generally have high energy levels unless they're in really toxic circumstance. And it's the case that as we age and as we have poor lifestyle habits and environmental exposures that are non-optimal, we incur more and more damage and dysfunction to our mitochondria that lowers our energy levels. There's one more aspect of that that's really important. When they do research where they take muscle biopsies, they take a big hollow needle, jab it into a person's thigh muscle, and then they take a chunk of that muscle and they look at it under a microscope. When they look at a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old and a 60-year-old and a 70-year-old, they show that on average, people lose about 10% of their mitochondria with each decade of life. So a 70-year-old, a typical 70-year-old, has only about 25% of the mitochondria that a young adult has. So that is another huge factor that is a major cause of low energy levels. Most people are losing their cellular energy generators as they get older.
So is that in muscle tissue? I'm not seeing the correlation between the mitochondria and the muscle mass. And does it matter about the activity of the person? Because I'm 56 and I'm very active. So would my mitochondria be higher than a typical person my age that's not active?
Okay. So let me answer the two questions separately. The first thing that you said, if you're not seeing the correlation. So this is a way to measure how many energy generators are in the cells of the body. And what I'm saying is that instead of having 100 energy generators in each one of your cells, you now have 25 as you get older. Fewer energy generators means less capacity to produce energy, less energy. So that's the first one. And that's true across the board, not just in muscle tissue, but throughout all the tissues of the body. The brain, the heart, the liver, everything has that general decline.
That makes sense.
Now, the second question you asked is a perfect one, because it's also been shown, if somebody listens to what I just said, they might conclude, wow, that's really awful that we're losing so much of our mitochondria as a result of the aging process. But in fact, when we look at 70-year-olds who are lifelong exercisers, athletes, they have the same mitochondrial capacity as a young person. So what that means is actually the loss of mitochondria is not just a normal product of the aging process. It is actually the result of lack of what's called hormetic stress, lack of stimulating and challenging your mitochondria. So in the same way that if you broke an arm or a leg and you had a cast on there for 2 months, and then you get the cast off, you look down at your arm or your leg and it's half the size of the other one because those muscles atrophied. The same exact process is happening internally with our mitochondria. If you are not engaging in hormetic stress, things like exercise, things like fasting, heat exposure, cold exposure, breath holding practices, various kinds of phytochemicals in your diet, if you don't have those layers built into your lifestyle, and most people living in the modern world don't, that is the equivalent of disuse. It's the equivalent of putting an arm or a leg in a cast and not challenging those muscle fibers. When they're not challenged, they shrink, they atrophy. And the same exact thing is happening internally at the cellular level. The body is ruthless in getting rid of tissue that is energetically costly, that is not needed for survival. And it happens this fast. It happens in a matter of weeks. If you put an arm or a leg in a cast, in literally just 8 weeks, the muscles shrink to half the size. Just 8 weeks. That's how ruthless the body is in getting rid of any tissue that's energetically costly, that's not needed for survival. If it's in a cast and it's not being used, the body goes, I guess we don't need that tissue for survival. Let's get rid of it. So the same exact thing happens with mitochondria. Mitochondria are extremely energetically costly, okay? And if they're not needed to meet the demands of their environment, the body gets rid of them. So what might be interesting to insert into that, to maybe understand it, is to consider that different animal species are born with different amounts of mitochondria. There is an optimal balance of a sort of optimal amount of mitochondria that's needed for survival. I'll give you an example. Creatures that don't move much, like let's say a sloth, have very little mitochondria. Creatures like a hummingbird that's flapping its wings, 40, 60, 100 flaps per second or something ridiculous like that, they have so many mitochondria in their cells. I think it's like 500% or 1,000% more than humans have, that they have to spend their entire waking day trying to feed those mitochondria. Okay, like almost every waking moment is devoted to flying around, finding a flower, sucking nectar, and pouring sugar into those mitochondria so they can continue to function. It's also the case that that's a massive liability. Okay, so such that at night, just to survive the nighttime period of 6 or 8 hours or 10 hours of darkness, the hummingbird has to go almost into a state of hibernation. You can actually go up to a sleeping hummingbird and pick it up and hold it in your hand, and it won't move because it's in such a deep state of slumber where it's shut down almost all of its body processes that it won't even be capable of responding. You can't wake it up,
Wow.
And the reason why it does that is because it has to shut down the engines on all of that energetic machinery just to survive the nighttime period. Because if it kept those engines running, it would burn through so much energy that it would starve to death overnight.
Wow.
Okay. So what this means is there's an optimal balance. This is a bit of a digression, but hopefully an interesting one. There's an optimal balance of the amount of mitochondria we have in our cells and their requirement to burn through energy and our survival. So we need enough mitochondria that we can have enough energy to go hunt and gather and build and fight and survive. But we don't want so much mitochondria that we have to keep pouring food in the system every 5 minutes. Otherwise, we're going to be hungry and starve to death, you know? So anyway, there's an optimal balance there. And there's a genetic component to that, which humans and other animal species have different amounts genetically. And there's also a range. So you can either have, let's say, as an example, 250 in a cell or 1,000 per cell. A young person might have 1,000, whereas an old person might have 250 or 300 in the equivalent cell. And if you move back towards the youthful levels of 1,000, you will have more energy as a result of that.
So earlier you said that a lifelong exerciser in their 70s will have about the same amount of mitochondria as a younger person. However, if you have a person in their 70s that hasn't been a lifelong exerciser, is there a way to recapture an optimal level?
Yeah, great question. So that's the good news, is there is such a thing called mitochondrial biogenesis. And this what's going on in our cells is dynamic. And it's a dynamic state that's responding to our environment, to our lifestyle, to the challenges on them. So just as a muscle will shrink if you don't challenge it, if you challenge it, it will grow, right? So the same thing happens with mitochondria. And we have something called mitochondrial biogenesis, which is actually the ability to not only grow bigger mitochondria, which we can do, but also to create new mitochondria, more mitochondria from scratch. And by engaging in hormetic stressors like the ones I mentioned, heat, cold, exercise, various subtypes of exercise, breath holding practices, certain kinds of phytochemicals, we can stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis and regrow them.
Cool. Okay. So that's what I want to focus on. You said a lot of things that I have questions on. So when you say phytochemicals that can help us improve our mitochondria, which phytochemicals are you recommending?
Yeah. So there's almost an endless variety of them, but some of the really helpful ones I would say are EGCG from tea. That's a really powerful one. Also, tea and cacao plants have something called catechins, catechins, excuse me, like epicatechin, and there's many other types of catechins. There's also astaxanthin is a wonderful one. This is a pink carotenoid that is found first in algae, certain kinds of algae, a couple species, and then accumulates up the food chain. This is what gives shrimp and krill their pink color. It's what gives salmon their pink color. It's what gives flamingo their pink color. It's this specific carotenoid that bioaccumulates in our tissues, and it actually embeds itself in mitochondria and helps protect mitochondria. That's a great one. Turmeric, as several of them, curcumin being the most notable one. Cruciferous vegetables have sulforaphane. There's also resveratrol, pterostilbene, which is a resveratrol-like molecule. There's dozens of others, apigenin and luteolin, and there's a lot of others, but many different types of phytochemicals act as what they call in the literature exercise mimetics, meaning they mimic at the biochemical level, they mimic a lot of the effects of exercise by stimulating a lot of those same pathways. In particular, there's a pathway called the NRF2 pathway. And this pathway is stimulated in response to hormetic stressors, to a transient, a temporary spike in free radicals. There's a lot we could go into, but basically exercise creates, this is kind of counterintuitive because people are used to thinking of free radicals and oxidants are bad, but exercise creates a spike, a temporary spike in free radicals. And actually, a lot of the benefits of exercise come from that spike of free radicals. So what happens in response to that is the mitochondria sense the presence of this spike of free radicals. And it is very much akin to a muscle sensing like the strain of being asked to lift a heavy load. It goes, whoa, we're being really challenged, right? So mitochondria are challenged by the presence of this spike of free radicals, reactive oxygen species. And in response to it, that is actually the signal for mitochondria to grow bigger and stronger, and for mitochondrial biogenesis, for them to create more mitochondria from scratch. Okay, the reason why is the more mitochondria you have, the better able to handle stress they are. So it's the same as like you lift a weight, challenge that muscle, the muscle grows more, it develops more muscle fibers to be able to handle the demand that's placed on it. Another way of visualizing this is, let's say you and I were together right now in the same house, and there was a building on fire next to us, and we said, oh my gosh, we got to go put that building out, the fire out. And we both start getting buckets of water and we both start pouring it on the fire. Well, is it easier for just you and I to do that, or you and I plus two other people?
Yeah.
Right? So the stress load that the body is under is handled with greater ease with more mitochondria.
Okay. Many hands make light work.
Exactly. I'm going to take that from you. I should integrate that quote. So basically, this burst of free radicals is part of what stimulates the mitochondria to grow bigger and stronger and to create more mitochondria. And part of the effect also is to engage this NRF2 pathway, which basically is a molecule that signals to inside of the mitochondria to something called the ARE, the antioxidant response element. And this is our internal antioxidant system with powerful internal antioxidants that like glutathione and catalase and superoxide dismutase. And these are the molecules that the cell and the mitochondria use to neutralize free radicals. So in other words, again, just like a muscle grows stronger in response to being challenged, the mitochondria grows in the antioxidant system inside the cell grows stronger in response to being challenged by oxidants, by free radicals.
That makes sense.
So basically by creating that system more robust. So actually, just to wrap this thought up, loop it back into the original question, exercise stimulates that pathway. Heat stimulates that pathway. Cold exposure stimulates it. Breath holding practices stimulate it. And phytonutrients can also mimic the same pathway, hence why they're called exercise mimetics. They can also stimulate that same pathway and make the internal antioxidant system of the cell more robust. The more robust that system is, the bigger and stronger your mitochondria are, and the more of them that you have, the greater your resilience threshold, the more your body is resistant to the effects of stress at the cellular level.
Okay. I love that. I love that we have a lot of options. So to kind of encompass a good lifestyle routine, what do you do on a regular basis? Like I have a sauna. I go in my sauna 3 days a week. I mean, I have a lot of really good practices. I work out a lot, but what do you think the average person can do on a regular basis to be able to take advantage of those options?
Sauna is absolutely wonderful. Sauna is one of the best options out there. The research on sauna exposure is pretty amazing. There's research showing 60+% reductions in the incidence of dementia and neurological disease in those who use a sauna regularly. 65% reductions in cardiovascular disease. 57 or something percent reductions in all-cause mortality, the risk of dying from any cause in those who use a sauna frequently. So I'm a huge advocate of sauna, but obviously a sauna costs money, it's expensive, and not everybody has access to it. I'm a huge advocate of exercise, of course, but and there's many subtypes of exercise that have unique benefits and stimulate different adaptations. But many people who are in a chronically fatigued state can't do exercise very well. And in fact, a severe chronic fatigue state, one of the classic symptoms is called post-exertional malaise, which means that in response to physical exertion, they will often be kind of wiped out and exhausted for 2 or 3 days following it. So for people with severe chronic fatigue, exercise is not a great place to start. But things like sauna exposure is, and there's case studies on people with chronic fatigue syndrome using a sauna showing, they measure many different symptoms from pain to brain fog, to energy, of course, and they show within literally a month of using a sauna, reductions from scores in like an 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of fatigue to 2 or a 3 in terms of fatigue. So massive improvements in energy.
How often would you recommend a person use a sauna in order to achieve benefit? Like you say, regular use. Does that mean daily or every other day, or?
So the studies that I mentioned before, where they look at cardiovascular disease mortality, they look at neurological diseases and all-cause mortality. The cool thing about those studies is they actually they looked at not only the frequency of how often a person uses a sauna, and they also looked at the duration, how long they stay in each time. And what the numbers that I'm citing are actually based on daily use. So using the sauna once per day, and what they show is that the relationship is a direct correlation, meaning the more you use the sauna, going from 1 day a week to 7 days a week, the greater the effect. The longer one stays in the sauna, going from 10 minutes to 30 minutes, the greater the effect. So using it more frequently and for longer duration leads to a greater effect. Okay, as you would expect. There's a Goldilocks zone where, and this is true with like exercise and everything, where if you don't do enough of it, you don't get much benefit. And it's also the case that if you do way too much, you can negate the benefit, right? This is why, for example, like ultra endurance, ultra marathon runners can calcify their arteries and die of a heart attack at age 45, right? It's too much. They've exceeded the Goldilocks zone of that. The same can be done with saunas, and it can be done with everything. But in that research, they actually don't even show a plateau. So up to 7 days a week, meaning it never started to go down where the benefits decreased with greater use. So up to daily use for, I believe it was about half an hour per session, they're showing the benefits just continue to increase. So all of that is still within the Goldilocks zone. You haven't done, presumably if you were doing 2 or 3 times a day, you'd probably get into the realm where it's more harmful than beneficial.
Okay. Yeah. And to me, if you're going to do it regularly, you've got to replace electrolytes, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely.
To do the sweat. So let's talk about your book before we run out of time. And we haven't even really talked too much about nutrition, but Eat for Energy. What can you tell us about that, Ari?
So my new book is basically the It's all about the science of how to use nutrition specifically to optimize your mitochondrial energy production. And I've been studying nutrition for over 25 years now, and this is basically the distillation of all my knowledge on that topic as it relates to optimizing energy production, and as an added benefit, also disease prevention and longevity are a huge aspect here. There's also a big focus in the book on brain health, optimizing for mood, combating anxiety and depression, optimizing sleep as well. So the breakdown of the book is basically the first chapter is all about understanding how our mitochondria work and how they regulate our energy levels. And then we get into the specific strategies. So the next chapter, chapter 2, is all about optimizing the circadian rhythm, the body clocks. We've got a central clock in the brain. We've got peripheral clocks throughout all the tissues of our body, our heart, our liver, our intestines, our muscles. Everything has these clock in them. And we can use nutrition to optimize those clocks. And the next chapter is all about optimizing body composition, how to lose fat, build muscle, which is a big factor in energy levels. The next one's all about insulin resistance and blood sugar levels, and how do we use nutrition to reverse those issues. And the next chapter is all about optimizing gut health. The gut is connected to everything. There's a gut-brain axis, a gut-immune axis, a gut-mitochondria axis. So how do we use nutrition to optimize our gut health, and especially the gut-mitochondria axis? And the next chapter is all about optimizing brain health. And then part 2 of the book, there's 2 chapters. One is all about energy superfoods, and the final chapter is all about energy supplements. So the top evidence-based supplements for optimizing your mitochondrial health and energy production. And the last thing I'll mention here is really, this isn't like a typical diet book in the sense that I'm saying, hey, everybody's got it wrong. It's not low fat. It's not paleo. It's not keto. It's not vegan. Really, this is the one true best way to eat. This is really a flexible, non-dogmatic set of dozens of different nutrition strategies that can be integrated with whatever you want to do as far as your dietary pattern, whether you're vegan or keto or paleo or anything in between. The intention here is not to give you some wacky, extreme, one-size-fits-all diet. It's to give you a flexible, non-dogmatic set of nutrition strategies that you can pick and choose from, like a buffet, which ones you want to integrate.
Okay, that's awesome. And with all of your knowledge, and I'm sure that, your book and research for the years that you've been doing it, tell us a sample day in your nutrition and like healthy habits that you enjoy.
Oh, okay. So I would say, let's see, a typical day might be a morning with either pastured eggs on top of a bed of like sauteed greens, some avocado, maybe some plantains as well. Then a typical breakfast might also be like sardines and avocado. That I know that grosses some people out, but I like sardines. Typical lunch might be, could also be sardines, but it could be like turkey bacon or some chicken breasts or some shrimp or something like that, mixed with vegetables, carrots, beets, things of that nature. And then a typical dinner is probably similar, usually chicken, beef, seafood, with a healthy serving of veggies as well. Oh, and I should also mention fruit typically for breakfast as well. And since I live in Costa Rica, I eat quite a bit of fruit, usually with breakfast and lunch.
Okay, awesome. That sounds pretty similar to me. I make this special probiotic yogurt with organic half and half for, the gut health. What about your healthy habits? Like you said, you surf a lot, which is awesome. So you're out on the sand, grounding, enjoying the energy of the water and the sun. And but you did mention breath work. So I'm curious about that. So tell us a little bit more about just your healthy habits.
Okay, so morning usually consists of breath work routines, breath holding practices, what's called intermittent hypoxic training. And there's various ways of doing this, but the basic gist of it is doing breath holds on an exhale in repetition. And these can either be done while stationary, while sitting or laying down, in which case the breath holds will be very long, or I like to do them often while moving. So this morning I was actually at the beach walking my dogs, and while I was doing that, while I was walking down the beach, I'm doing breath holds, and I'm counting the number of paces, trying to beat my previous times of paces. And that's actually a wonderful way to do it, because the number of steps you take is like a challenge. It's like a game that you get to play to beat your previous times, and you have an objective way of gauging progress. And this breath holding is an amazing hormetic stressor that challenges so many different systems of our body. It challenges the mitochondria in a huge way, and it also creates actually adaptations at the lungs to build up the lungs, and creates structural adaptations at the lung-blood interface. So where the air sacs in the lungs meet the capillaries, meet the blood vessels, that interface changes such that the body can extract oxygen more efficiently. The mitochondria are also stimulated to change by this type of stressor, right? Think again back to how a muscle is challenged by lifting a weight. How does the challenge differ when you're doing a breath hold, right? You're challenging different systems, so you get different adaptations. And the interface between the capillaries and the cell also changes to deliver more oxygen to the cell. And the mitochondria changes so that it becomes, number one, it becomes more tolerant of low oxygen states, more resistant to stress, and builds up that internal antioxidant system like I talked about. And it becomes more efficient at extracting and utilizing oxygen to produce energy. One of the other effects when you use breath holding practices with movement is you actually build up your buffering capacity for acid. So when you do exercise and you use your muscles, you feel the muscles burning at a certain point in certain kinds of activities. And that's actually the buildup of acid, of hydrogen ions and lactic acid in your cells. And by doing breath holding practices combined with the movement, it's been shown that the body raises its lactate threshold. It's basically can tolerate higher acid loads. And that's one way of enhancing performance, and is a big factor in those who are dealing with chronic lack of energy, fatigue. So that's a big focus for me. Usually I meditate. I start the day either combined with the breath holding practices like I did this morning, or before that I start with light exposure in the eyes. So first thing in the morning I go get sunlight in my eyes and get that circadian clock turned on. The circadian clock in our brain regulates tons of different neurotransmitters and hormones like thyroid hormone, testosterone, growth hormone, cortisol, melatonin, that are impacting on many different aspects of our health and energy production. So optimize the circadian rhythm first, breathing practices, sometimes combined with movement practices, either walking or things like yoga, or other just mobility, light exercise work, meditation. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm in the water. I'm in the ocean surfing some mornings.
That's meditative, isn't it?
It can be if it's a smaller day. If it's a day with big surf, then it can be very intense and If it's big and crowded with lots of people, then it can be very stressful.
You can tell I'm not a surfer.
Yeah. Well, no, it can be meditative for sure. You're correct. It's also the case that it can be sort of the opposite. It can be very intense and stressful some days, but
That's
also
so
exhilarating. You get a big adrenaline dump, and yeah, I mean, there's lots of other things we could talk about. I'm big on recharge rituals, what I call recharge rituals, which are basically combining ways of stimulating deep relaxation in the body using music and sound, using massage, self-massage like foam rolling and things like that, and using meditation and breathing techniques. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on here, but that's a little glimpse of some of my daily routines.
Love it. I could sit and talk to you forever. Okay. Well, I think that we need to tell our listeners where they can find your book.
Yeah, so the book came out on May 10th, and it's available wherever you can buy books online. But yeah, go grab it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to buy books. And it's packed with, like I said, dozens of non-dogmatic, non-extreme, pretty easy to implement nutritional strategies and superfoods and supplements that are proven to enhance energy levels. And there's over 1,000 scientific references in the book. I had someone the other day who was a nurse practitioner write a review on Amazon, and she said, I was really skeptical of this book when I first got it, and I thought it was just going to be a bunch of fluff and pseudoscience. And she said, and I'm shocked that there's over 1,000 scientific references. I've never seen anything like this outside of a textbook. So I've never seen anything like where there's almost as many pages of the scientific references as there is of the book itself.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I can't wait to read it. I love everything that you've taught us today. Two quick things I wanted to mention. Do you do grounding? Like, I have a grounding mat in my bed.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So when I do light exposure first thing in the morning, I'm barefoot on my land, getting the sun and getting the earth.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. I just like to have a mat in my bed because then it's 8 hours, or well, I don't get 8 hours, but almost 8 hours. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, I love sardines. I'm Sicilian. Wrap them in nori.
Ooh, that's
seaweed.
That's nice. Yeah.
So good. So good. That's like how I like to eat them now. But anyways, where can they find you? Where can the listeners find you? What's your website?
My website's theenergyblueprint.com, but right now the best place, just grab the book, and that'll sort of tell you everything that you need to know.
Okay, perfect. I can't wait. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Ari. I could sit here and talk to you forever.
Yeah.
So it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It was absolutely a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you go out and check out his book so you too can feel more energy every day. And for the complete show notes, head on over to highenergygirl.com/show. Make it a great day, everyone. This podcast contains the opinion and thoughts of its host and guests. It is intended to provide helpful and informative material on the subjects covered. All statements made on the podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. If the listener requires professional assistance or advice, please contact your personal medical doctor. Both host and guest specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence directly or indirectly of the use and application of any of the contents of these episodes. Like I said, this is my opinion and I could be wrong.